Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, it centers on Carl Jung's really profound concept of the individuated mind and, well, the unique characteristics that go along with it. These are outlined in the source material, The Individuated Mind, a Jungian Perspective. So when we talk about the individuated mind, we're essentially referring to that deep psychological state Jung described, where someone consciously integrates their conscious and unconscious selves. The aim is achieving this sense of wholeness and unique selfhood. Today, we're going to try and unpack the implications of these multi-dimensional, symbolically conscious, and interestingly, paradox-embracing minds. Now, the central question for our debate today is this: is the primary imperative for individuals who have this individuated consciousness, is it really to actively bridge societal gaps, to serve as a catalyst for collective transformation?
Or, alternatively, is it more about embracing their inherent psychological isolation and cultivating a profound self-companionship? I'll be arguing for the first position, the outward-facing, transformative, and you could say evolutionary role of the individuated mind in advancing collective consciousness.
And I'll be presenting the perspective that actually the core reality and perhaps the true path to wholeness for these individuals really lies in acknowledging and navigating their inherent isolation, and doing that through deep self-integration and finding companionship within. It's fundamentally about understanding their unique internal landscape first and foremost. Any broader impact, while significant, might be more of a secondary outcome.
Right. So, to elaborate a bit on my position, the source material, I think, paints a pretty clear picture here. The individuated mind is explicitly described as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious. Now, this isn't just a passive state. It embodies what the text calls a catalytic consciousness, meaning its very presence can actually transform others. This energy, what Jung called individuation energy, it isn't just for personal growth. It seems to actively awaken people around them to their own unrealized potential. And the article's quite direct, stating these individuals are crucial to human evolution. It pushes back against any idea that they're somehow too much or broken. Instead, the implication is they're meant to embrace these gifts, not hide them. They're identified as wounded healers, individuals who manage to convert their own personal struggles into wisdom that can benefit others. And, interestingly, they are repeatedly drawn to growth through crisis, not just for their own evolution, but explicitly to advance collective consciousness by contributing new archetypal insights to humanity. And when we say archetypal insights, we mean these sort of fresh, universal patterns of understanding that can help humanity navigate its collective psychological journey. So, from this angle, their role seems inherently outward-facing, serving a larger collective purpose that really extends beyond just their personal inner world.
Okay, I see why you emphasize that outward push. And yes, the text definitely highlights the potential for collective impact. I wouldn't disagree with that potential. However, the way I'd frame it is, while that potential is immense, the lived experience of the individuated mind, as the article itself details quite vividly, is profoundly marked by isolation. Just consider the trait of multi-dimensional processing. This means these individuals absorb, well, far more information than others typically realize, including subtle emotional frequencies, unconscious motivations, things most people miss.
Right.
And this makes everyday conversations, as the text says, exhausting for them. Then there's their symbolic consciousness. They naturally think in symbols, translating everyday events into these deeper archetypal meanings, those universal patterns of experience, which, frankly, others often find abstract or too deep. Then you have shadow integration. Now that's the crucial process of acknowledging and incorporating the parts of the unconscious self we usually reject or repress. It's vital for their own wholeness, absolutely. But this process often unsettles others who are perhaps still quite attached to their socially acceptable masks. And all this seems to culminate in what the text calls existential homesickness and genuine psychological isolation. It's a loneliness described as stemming not from lack of people, but from existing in another dimension of consciousness. And finally, their paradoxical thinking, this ability to embrace both and rather than rigid either-or categories, well, it leads to communication challenges, as many demand certainty rather than complexity. So ultimately, the article points out that this loneliness eventually gives way to profound self-companionship, as the fully integrated self becomes the ultimate home. And that really suggests an internal resolution, prioritizing deep internal integration as their primary path.
That's certainly a compelling and quite poignant description of the challenges they face, but I would maybe suggest that the very nature of their catalytic consciousness offers a kind of counterpoint to that isolation you describe. The material details this inherent capacity to impact and transform others simply by their presence, right? And this flow of individuation energy. If their very being has this observable effect, are they truly isolated in the profound way you suggest? Isn't that catalytic impact, that awakening of potential in others, isn't that itself a deep form of connection, even if it's not always a, let's say, reciprocated verbal exchange? It seems like a powerful form of nonverbal communication, a sort of constant emanation of insight. If someone's presence consistently inspires growth or nudges others towards self-awareness, isn't that a profound connection, even if the surface-level conversations feel draining? It feels like the text implies this impact itself mitigates the feeling of being utterly alone.
I understand why you'd see it that way. And yes, the catalytic effect is undeniable according to the text. But I don't believe the effect they have on others necessarily alleviates their subjective experience of isolation. The text consistently seems to suggest this impact often fails to bridge that fundamental gap in understanding they experience. So while their presence might transform others, the burden of perceiving what others miss, that intuitive perception, is still very much their own cross to bear, so to speak. The article explicitly states, conversations can be exhausting precisely because they absorb so much information, and that others may find them abstract or too deep. This seems to indicate a persistent barrier to genuine, reciprocal connection, both intellectually and emotionally, regardless of their transformative influence. People might be drawn to confide in them, yes, the text notes that, but crucially, it also says superficial small talk feels draining. This highlights a distinct lack of resonant companionship in many everyday interactions, even amidst their undeniable impact. The transformation might be happening through them, yes, but it often feels like a one-way street in terms of their personal experience of connection and mutual understanding. Their personal journey of navigating that unique internal landscape remains, it seems, largely solitary.
Well, perhaps the burden you speak of is actually an inherent part of the gift itself. I mean, the concept of wounded healers, which the text uses, inherently implies a certain sacrifice, doesn't it? A transformation of personal suffering into a resource for the collective. The text frames transformation not merely as a choice, but as a psychological imperative for these individuals, and it feels like an imperative that clearly extends outward. They advance collective consciousness by contributing new archetypal insights to humanity. That language isn't passive. It strongly implies a mandate to not just be individuated, but to actively contribute the fruits of that individuation to the broader human experience.
Right.
They are explicitly described as bridges and even symbols of humanity's psychological future. This feels like it goes beyond just passively emanating energy. It points directly to an active, outward-facing evolutionary responsibility. Their purpose, it seems to me, is deeply intertwined with the collective's progress.
I agree that the text defines a profound societal role for them, and that idea of them as symbols of humanity's psychological future is, well, it's powerful, no question. However, I would ask, is that collective advancement their primary imperative? Or is it perhaps a natural, maybe even inevitable, outcome of their deeply personal journey? The article also heavily emphasizes individuation itself, that lifelong process of integrating conscious and unconscious parts of the self. And critically, it notes that loneliness eventually gives way to profound self-companionship as the fully integrated self becomes the ultimate home. This internal resolution, this deep self-integration, really seems to be the bedrock of their existence described here.
The internal psychological archaeology, that deep dive into understanding their childhood wounds, their unconscious motivations, it's often described almost as a burden and a gift, primarily for them to process and integrate first. Now, while this process might later yield those archetypical insights for collective dissemination, is the primary imperative the personal journey towards self-integration and inner wholeness, with collective advancement being a significant but perhaps secondary consequence rather than the initial externally driven goal? It feels more like the catalytic effect is a natural emanation, maybe a ripple effect, rather than a conscious directed outward effort being the main point.
I'm not entirely convinced that framing the collective impact as merely a secondary outcome fully captures the urgency and the specific language used in the source material. Think about the closing insight. It explicitly states they must embrace these gifts as crucial to human evolution, and that the challenge is isolation, the opportunity is transformation, both personal and collective. That word must, it suggests a duty, doesn't it? An active acceptance of this role. It doesn't sound passive. It suggests a conscious, active role in allowing their gifts to be seen and understood, maybe as a way to overcome the isolation by acting as that bridge. It's not simply about being whole internally, but perhaps about sharing that wholeness, using their unique perspective to illuminate paths for others. The opportunity for collective transformation is presented almost as a direct counter to the challenge of isolation, implying that embracing this outward role is the very path to overcoming that loneliness. They aren't just evolving themselves, they are meant, it seems, to be a beacon.
I suppose I come at it from a different angle, thinking about the practicalities. How can they effectively be this bridge or this beacon in a practical day-to-day sense when the very traits that define them create such significant barriers? Their shadow integration, for instance. The text says it often unsettles others. It confronts people with uncomfortable truths they might prefer to keep repressed.
True.
And their paradoxical thinking, it leads to communication challenges, precisely because, as the text notes, many demand certainty rather than complexity, which seems like a core human need for simplicity that their minds inherently challenge. The article even observes that books, art, and philosophy often provide more companionship than everyday interactions. Now, that's a pretty stark observation. It suggests a fundamental and perhaps persistent difficulty in finding real resonance in conventional societal engagement. So, given these profound communication and social challenges, doesn't deep self-companionship become a more sustainable, accessible, and frankly, psychologically healthier path to wholeness, rather than a constant, often unrewarded struggle for widespread external validation or understanding? It's not that they don't have an impact, of course they do, but maybe the imperative for the individual is to build that robust internal world first as the ultimate sanctuary.
Well, while I certainly acknowledge these significant hurdles, they are laid out very clearly. I think the text kind of compels us to look beyond immediate gratification or, easy paths. The transformative power, that individuation energy, implies that the very discomfort they might cause, that can be the catalyst for growth in others. Their paradoxical thinking, while challenging, is precisely what allows them to offer those new archetypal insights. The point isn't necessarily that it's easy, but that it's framed as necessary for human evolution. Perhaps the act of bridging isn't always through direct, comfortable conversation. Maybe it's through creating art or writing or simply living authentically as a testament to their integrated self. These are still outward expressions, aren't they? They contribute to the collective, even if not always in conventional social settings. They provide alternative perspectives, pushing society towards greater self-awareness, even when sometimes met with resistance. It's about finding those creative avenues for that crucial societal input.
I agree that creative expression can be a powerful outlet, a way to share their internal world, and the text certainly supports the idea of their deep internal processing leading to profound insights that can eventually benefit humanity. However, even if they communicate through art or philosophy, is that a direct bridging societal gaps in the active way your argument seems to suggest? Or is it still fundamentally an outcome of their internal cultivation, and thus a more indirect form of collective impact? My position remains that the primary imperative for the individual themselves is that intense journey of integration and developing that profound self-companionship. The text seems to suggest that this internal journey is so demanding, so fundamentally different from the norm, that the individual's path to wholeness must first prioritize finding that home within themselves. The collective transformation, then, becomes an inevitable, certainly valuable, but perhaps not the primary driven goal or mandate. It's more like a consequence of an individual's successful navigation of their own unique psychological reality. It's not about avoiding impact, but about where the primary focus of their consciousness must necessarily lie for their own well-being and ultimate integration.
Well, I think we certainly agree on the profound impact and the unique nature of the individuated mind. For me, the individuated consciousness, with its multidimensional processing and that catalytic energy, it really does represent humanity's psychological future, as the text suggests. And while the path undoubtedly involves navigating profound personal transformation, and yes, inherent isolation, the source material strongly suggests its ultimate significance lies in its capacity to bridge conscious and unconscious realms for the collective. These individuals seem positioned as indispensable catalysts for broader human evolution, and their journey isn't just for themselves, but for the profound new insights they bring to all of us, ultimately helping humanity evolve. Their role feels fundamentally outward-looking, serving a higher collective purpose.
And I would maintain that the journey of the individuated mind, though yes, immensely powerful, is fundamentally an internal one, marked by that profound psychological isolation. Therefore, the development of self-companionship through deep self-integration becomes paramount. It's what allows the individual to navigate a world often unready for their particular depth. Any collective impact, while undeniably significant, emerges organically from their own achieved wholeness and internal resolution, rather than being a primary externally driven pursuit or obligation. The personal journey of integration and self-understanding is their bedrock, their ultimate home, and perhaps the most crucial imperative for their unique mode of existence.
Both perspectives, I think, clearly underscore the unique and vital role of the individuated mind in our psychological landscape.
Indeed, whether one sees it as primarily a collective bridge or more of a self-sufficient sanctuary, the traits described in the individuated mind, a Jungian perspective, certainly highlight a deeper mode of existence, and one that offers a great deal for us to understand and perhaps appreciate, both within ourselves potentially and in the broader tapestry of human consciousness.